Welcome to Talking Out Your Glass. I'm Sean Wagoner. Michael Meilahn's body of work, which includes glass sculpture and large glass and multimedia installations, intertwines the artist's investigation into agriculture, crop production, genetic food modification, and the ancient history of corn. Primordial Shift, a quintessential example of Meilahn's later installations, consisted of 32 hand-blown glass ears of corn averaging 4 feet high, suspended on stalks of cord, with leaves of cast bronze on a backdrop of video projected to create an illusion of gentle swaying in the breeze and surround sound audio that included the chirping of birds and rustling of leaves. Since 2022, Meilahn's Primordial Shift exhibition has been touring the U.S., with stops at Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass, Neenah, Wisconsin, the John P. McGovern Museum of Health and Medical Science, Houston, Texas, South Dakota Art Museum at South Dakota State University, Brookings, South Dakota, and the Rochester Art Museum in Rochester, Minnesota, from June 1st through September 30th, 2025. Primordial Shift is a work of art, but underlying Meilahn's aesthetic is an agnostic, if not ambivalent, philosophy concerning agronomy or the crop science and the application of that science by horticulturalists to plant production for the enhancement and improvement of nature for human and animal life. In that sense, Primordial Shift, along with most of the artist's installations, are not agents for or of change, but artworks that illuminate the pros and cons of genetic modification. States Meilahn, with today's sophisticated technology and global positioning, a 24-row corn planter can plant 1,000 acres a day with laser accuracy, 35,000 plants per acre with placement exactly 6 inches apart and 1 3/4 inches deep. The instant the seed hits the ground, germination begins. That germination is as primal as it gets. It's everywhere. Just look. The shift part is engineered, with results that are all so convenient. Is this shift good? You decide. Meilahn, born in 1945, grew up on a family farm near Pickett in central Wisconsin. After graduating in 1964 from high school in Ripon, where he excelled in art, he entered the University of Wisconsin River Falls to study agriculture. He subsequently switched his major to art after he realized agribusiness was not his passion. At UW River Falls, he took his first course in glass, and in 1966, he started blowing glass. At this time, Harvey Littleton was running the studio glass program at UW-Madison, made famous by a slew of glass graduates, the most famous being Dale Chihuly. As an undergraduate, Meilahn spent a quarter abroad working with glass legend Erwin Eisch in Fraunau, Germany, on the Bavaria-Czech border, an area with a rich tradition of glassmaking. After graduation in 1971, he spent a year in Bolivia as an idealistic Peace Corps volunteer intent on helping people in South America by sharing knowledge he'd learned from farming. Subsequently, he enrolled at Illinois State University Normal, where Joel Philip Myers had begun a glass program, and earned his master's degree in art. Ultimately, Meilahn's roots drew him back to his family's farm in 1975, where he and his wife Jane raised their children and where he alternately operated the family farm and the hot glass studio he built. In time, his passion for art and farming became one and the same as a form of creative expression. Since 1996, when he turned 50 and began planting genetic seed, Meilahn's artwork has focused on genetic modification, which has symbiotically shaped his life and work both as an artist and a farmer. His installations afford viewers the opportunity to view and contemplate the production of corn from the dual perspective of an artist who knows the subject from life. For the past 15 years or so, this convergence has been the basis for a number of important works. Meilahn served as the president of the board of directors of the Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass in Neenah, Wisconsin. He has taught at Penland School of Craft in North Carolina and the Archie Bray Foundation in Montana. His work has been exhibited in the Traveling Museum exhibitions, Wisconsin's Glass Masters, and Environmental Impact, produced by David J. Wagner, LLC, the annual Smithsonian Craft Show, and the Corning Museum of Glass, which has also featured the artist's work in its New Glass Review for over 4 decades. Meilahn says, "An ear of corn is the point of convergence for my dual careers in farming and art. Corn is not a typical subject in art, but for me, the lines, rows, numbers, higher prices, lower prices, color spectrums, mapping, information technology, air masses, and species have all combined to unwittingly become a catalyst for my art. Many thanks to the sponsors of this episode of Talking Out Your Glass: the Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass, Covington Engineering, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass, and Wet Dog Glass. To find out more about our sponsors, go to talkingoutyourglass.com, click on Episodes, Season 10, and Michael Meilahn. Michael Meilahn, thank you so much for joining me on Talking Out Your Glass podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You were born into a Wisconsin fourth-generation farm family. Talk about your upbringing and childhood. Any artists in the family?
Not that I know of. I guess it depends on how you refer to artists, what that means. But everybody plays a little bit when we're young, and my sister did some of that. But I really wasn't involved with making any art to speak of until I was a senior in high school.
How and when did you discover glass blowing at the University of Wisconsin River Falls?
And that was my intention, was to go to ag school. Being the only son in the family, that was just probably a natural move. My dad finished 8th grade, never went to high school to speak of. And so they were encouraged me to go to an ag school. And that's how I ended up in River Falls, because that's of the state systems that is really very well known for its agriculture. Into the second year of college, I made a pass through the art department on the way to a class, and they were throwing pots. And I thought, well, that looks like fun because you're all dirty. And that intrigued me. But I did have an high school teacher at one time that I won an award in a painting show as a senior in high school. So that was there at high school, but not really recognizable. And so when I went to college, I started to mess around a little bit in the art department. Pretty soon I switched my major to art. And that's the beginning.
So who were some of your contemporaries and what was happening in glass at the time you were at UW?
Well, what was really fun, because it was so new, this was 68, 67. And that was very new. Harvey started the whole thing in 1964. And his original teachers, who were basically art graduate students, had their first take of blowing glass and having glass furnaces and glass offered at that level. So it was that first generation of they only had one semester, and they were immediately hired by other universities to start programs. And so Doug Johnson was hired in, I believe, 1966 or 65 out of that first class. And so I started with, the real basics in 1966. What we had for a furnace at that time was what we could figure out on our own, how to put together a furnace. It was a hit and miss for everyone that was out there. And when I started, there was probably only 6 schools that had glass programs. And the real fun part of this whole experience was that we were talking to one another via phone calls of how do you do this and how do you do that, from annealing to making glass to making furnaces. And the art part was just everything we made was just brand new. And so it was a really fun time to be a part of this, because this grassroots movement, it was the late 60s, and everything was happening, and the art fairs took off. And so everything happened at the same time. To be clear, I guess, is that that's how the Glass Art Society was started. A group of artists got together in the early years and got together specifically to discuss technical and aesthetic ideas. And what transpired was the Glass Art Society. And now we have, thousands and thousands of members worldwide.
After graduation, you traveled to Europe to learn alongside German glass legend Erwin Eisch. Talk about Erwin. What was he like, and how did he influence what you wanted to do with glass?
Erwin is an incredible individual. I can't say enough about his personality because he was extremely generous, and his roots are in a glass factory in Fraunau, in the Bavarian area in Germany, and our college at River Falls offered a quarter abroad program, and the whole idea of that is you get 6 credits in your field, and you get 6 credits in sociology. The idea, though, is that you have to set up your own program. So we as artists had to call and contact people directly. It could be through a university or it could be through private enterprises. It varied depending on the majors. And the professor who did this, John Clark, and myself and Jim Engelbretson went on that trip that same year to go to Europe. And each of us went to different places. And to get these contacts was also somewhat of a give and take situation because I didn't know anyone, as a student. So I called Harvey Littleton, and he was gracious enough to give me Erwin Eich's name, Sybren Valkema, who's in Amsterdam, and Sam Herman, who was in Royal College of Art in London. So by writing letters, people said we could visit. And we meaning us, the three of us. And so I ended up going. John went to England, and Jim Engelbretson went to Holland, I believe, and I went to study with Erwin Eisch. Now, study means just kind of hanging out and staying out of their way, basically, because they're producing artists. And Erwin Eisch was extremely gracious because he had a cot in the back of his house, and he would put up different artists. And when I went that particular year, that's where I met Marvin Leposki, who was already had started a program in Berkeley. And so I met Marvin there, and so it was a means to connect with other artists and in the same field. And I got to sit, and Harvey had been there just previously, and the idea was to have an international glass symposium to travel Europe. And the artists were Sybren Valkema from Holland, and Marvin Leposki, and Erwin Eisch. And they were welcome to go and make the work at Eisch's factory or at his studio. And again, I want to reiterate, you learn a lot from somebody who's gracious. He passed away some time ago. And what the beauty of him is we could join dinner with his family. And he would just let us do whatever we wanted. So it was a really impressive, made a huge impression on me in the fact that he was he didn't care about the prettiness of glass because he grew up with it. So he was aggressive. He was an impressionist painter, and he would paint on the glass. He didn't care about it. So when I left there, the first thing I did is I started pouring paint in my blown forms when I got back to River Falls because we didn't know how to make a lot of colors at that time. So here I was pouring paint into to color the glass, and that changed everything. And that really is see it. That set me forward to be use glass not as a vehicle to make things pretty. Use the glass to make things, say something with the material, not just that it's glassy. So yeah, he was really an important person. So didn't mean to get all into that emotional thing, but
No.
he is a terrific person.
It's hard to lose friends, and the glass community inspires that so much, I think, which is a wonderful thing about all artists working with glass. So I wanted to ask you, you subsequently spent a year in the Peace Corps in Bolivia working alongside indigenous cultures, learning their agricultural traditions. Tell us about your experience there.
Well, I always wanted to be a part of that. It was intriguing, and at the time, there was a lot of things going on, and being a farm boy, they accepted me quite quickly because it seems like they wanted people who weren't afraid to get in the field and work with animals. I think was really their key focus. And my wife at that time and I went to Bolivia to work with Indians in campesinos on the high plains, which is the Altiplano. And what that is, above the tree line where there's not a lot of things that grow. And the sheep over time, because of inbreeding, they were very small. They were sometimes multicolored. In other words, they were spotty. They had a lot of brown and black hair and hair, not wool. And there's a lot of recessive genes. So our job was to bring in a purebred male and crossbreed those animals. But for example, they were so primitive that it's telling them. So for example, to do that, you have to separate all the males and you have to castrate them, and so that you have one crossbreed. That's like telling them to, like somebody telling me, okay, you're going to fly this airplane today, and you're going to get one lesson, and then you're on your own. Well, it's very complicated because they had a native tongue and I had poor Spanish, so we had to communicate through the children that spoke Spanish. So it was difficult situation. We were in the boondocks, so to speak, but we were at 10,000 feet, and not a lot of things grow there. But what I did learn from them, as poor as they are, they're incredibly gracious. And gringos would never be allowed to go in the black market in the cities, so to speak. You just didn't go to those places. When we would go there, white, blue-eyed people, the gringos, we found out the Peace Corps people were here, the kids would come and grab our hands and walk us anywhere we wanted throughout the black market. And it's really warming because we were considered to be helpful individuals. We weren't there to take anything. And we were just treated, wonderfully. So all those things, kind of set in stone for my work that came later, involving, what I really, really wanted to do. I didn't know at the time. And I eventually went back after that course, finished my undergraduate degree, and then I went to graduate school. And then I went to ISU in Illinois Normal, Bloomington Normal under Joel Myers.
We'll return to Meilahn in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass, providing extraordinary glass experiences to spark fun, kindle creativity, and illuminate learning for all. Your financial support during these holiday seasons. Provide creative activities for all ages, community-wide events, artful discoveries, and a continued legacy of free admission. Visit bmmglass.com/donate. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Covington Engineering. Finish your fused glass with Covington's professional line of cold working tools, now located in Meridian, Idaho. Visit covington-engineering.com for your cold working needs. And now, back to Meilahn. Yeah, how did your ideas about glass and your role as a maker evolve at Illinois State University, where you earned your master's, as you just mentioned?
Well, there were, at that time, I think there was probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 different universities that were offering graduate programs. And the thing about that particular time is that the graduate students didn't know a whole lot about making glass either, and neither did a lot of the professors, because they were only 2 or 3 or 4 years into it as well. But we were all making things, learning skills, and it wasn't just a professor telling us how to make something. We were all learning different skills and helping one another. There was this real camaraderie between graduate students and professors at that time. And that stayed that way until, there was more work being made. And then suddenly the collectors got involved, and that changed. That we needed those collectors to stimulate what we were doing. And that was very encouraging, because when we go to the glass meetings, it wasn't just a handful of people. Pretty soon it was 100 people, and pretty soon there was, well over 100. And of course, the problem I had going to those meetings is that I was back at the farm after graduate school, and of course they had always had those meetings in the spring, and I was in the field in the spring. There's no way I was going to get off the tractor to go to a meeting. It was impossible. But so when I built my first glass shop, I built 3 of them over my lifetime, but they're all within a mile of one another. And I added on to my studios, but it was very unfortunate because I couldn't continue with my compadres, so to speak, because I was in the field, and I missed those meetings a lot.
So when did you return to the family farm to work the land, build your studio, and create with glass? And talk a little bit about what was involved getting all that started and juggling all of it.
Yeah, still at that time, we were still struggling with. By that time, we knew that there were color bar companies. We could get our colors from some places, so that changed dramatically. By that time, we had more sophisticated annealing systems in place. The first furnace I built was not really the prettiest thing. It was a day tank, and it was kind of all old school already at that time. But when I went back to the farm, I believe it was 1975, and the reason I went, I was throwing around the idea. There was a job at San Jose and in California, and I just decided I didn't want to apply for that job because I wanted to take the kids. By that time I had met my wife, and she had children, and I said, it's time to really get serious about raising a family. And I wanted those kids to have the same freedoms that I had was growing up as a kid. We grew up in the field, we played in the cornfields. We played hide and seek and barefoot, and there's nothing like it. And so I thought, well, maybe I can just blow glass and farm both. And that's what I did. And it takes a lot to do those 2 jobs, a big commitment. Both of those commitments require upfront money. Both of those jobs, they're very similar. And both of those products are fluctuate in price dramatically. Selling art is very difficult, and so is making money, especially at that time. Going into the 80s, it was very difficult with farming because we had high interest rates, and farmers were, broke, and making glass and living on your glass is a tough go. It's some people have done very well with their work, and I commend them. But to do 2 jobs that well or that professionally takes a lot of. Basically, what I had was 4 seasons. I had the spring planting. I sold my work a lot of times at art fairs in the summer. We had harvest, and at that time, when harvest was over, we were back in the shop making art. And that's how it worked. And it worked that way for 50 years.
Never a dull moment, Mick.
Yes.
So describe and discuss your studio and what you were making there. You, as you mentioned, you were alternately working the farm and the hot glass studio you built. What equipment was there, and how did you begin making art from that space?
Well, the first studio that I made, was my dad's machine shed, dirt floors and big rolling doors in the front, and that's where they kept the tractor. And when he was, they didn't have a lot of machinery. It was only a 200-acre farm, And my grandfather had only, at that time, only had 75 acres. So they didn't need a lot of space. And so it was a matter of pouring cement and putting some water in. And then that was the first studio. And then I moved a mile down the road in 1980. So I moved my studio and did the same thing to a building, which was a granary attached to a machine shed. And that's the one where I made most of my work. And then in 1980, 92 or 2008, I built onto that building. I built a 50 by 75-foot studio with all the amenities, heated floors, and it's a great place to work. And I just retired here last year. So a few years ago, and building a studio is a lot of work. But today we have much more sophisticated means of blowing glass. Kids can buy small furnaces for really reasonable prices and can be blowing glass in a garage in a couple of weeks. It's very different than the early years.
So, what was the Wisconsin glass scene like in the late 70s, early 80s?
Again, it was, in Madison in the 80s, we had, I believe the Glass Art Society had their conference there in the 80s. I can't remember what year it was, but when I first came back here in 1975, it was Audrey Handler and myself, and in the following year, I think Jim Engelbretson opened up a studio. So there was just a handful of us here through the 70s and 80s. And as far as the art world was going, art glass, glass was so new that a lot of the collectors and a lot of antique collectors, I think, got into the new art scene because they all popped up at the same time. Art fairs were popping up everywhere. Craft was starting to be considered as an art form and not just a craft. So people were collecting a lot of images and a lot of objects. And really, a lot of credit goes to Ann Haberlin and the Edgewood Orchard Gallery in Door County, because she would have these, and a lot of us were, in the early years, had our traveling furnaces. I had a trailer with a furnace and a annealer on it. We would go to art fairs and different events, and there were a lot of people in a lot of throughout the country that were doing the same thing. So we were helping spread this idea of this hot, juicy, flowing, goofy material that's alive. If you aren't moving it, it just drips and goes away. And the public was really enthralled with that, and bringing the fire right directly to them, and the buying public, and Ann Haberlin galleries like her would welcome and even pay for, oftentimes, for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and have a mini glass conference, say with food, and would be a whole event. And Haberlin had her events at the same time for about 15 or 16 years. And she not only got collectors coming to meet us as artists, but we got to meet other artists as well. And we could talk, and we would have lectures, formal lectures, and you'd hear about what everybody else was doing. She was a huge powerhouse of spreading the word, especially through the 80s and early 90s. And now, it's quite different. It's prolific everywhere. We have thousands of people making glass today in this country alone. So it's really made lots of jumps. And Wisconsin's where it all started.
Some of your work features cast, cut, and polished glass assemblages that deal with classical form, function, and decorative pattern. Talk about that work and the time period in which it was made. Is that some of your earlier work?
Well, I made a lot of artists. What we make is determined by all kinds of things. What we think we're going to make sometimes doesn't turn out quite that way. When we make work that sells, we have a definite end goal with that. When we make work that's kind of let your mind kind of ramble, I mean, there's certain work that comes out that's decorative, And you add all those things together and you make objects that are of a wide range, from simply decorative work to conceptual work. And I made a lot of different types of work with different materials. Definitely a mixed media type person. And I've often I always thought of myself as not a good enough artist, because this isn't good enough or that's not good enough. So what is it to really be an artist? And it took me a whole lifetime to figure out that, well, you just make stuff. And you can call it, and we add all the semantics to it, and does it really matter what you say about it? And I think it does. And I think, like, for example, I worked with lots of cast glass pieces then I started working with cast glass and concrete. Then I started working with concrete and iron. Then I started working with concrete and bronze. And we started thinking about 3 materials, metals and concrete and glass. This is the world. The whole world is built on those 3 things. So when you bring them down and put them into aesthetic objects, that's really a goal, because I think people unknowingly recognize and like things because, well, that, okay, I guess I get it, but they're recognizing things without knowing it. And I drove cement truck for a couple of summers, and so I've seen a lot of things where concrete shouldn't be made, and I know how concrete works. And that drifted from decorative work pretty smoothly until 1995, when I started making work about my life, which was farming, and using that one image that everybody recognizes, especially throughout the United States, but all around the world, is the corn. We have a tremendous volume of just coming out of this country of 16 billion bushels every year. It's a phenomenal number, and it's continuing to increase.
Did your beginning to plant genetic seeds, did that inspire you to start working with the corn imagery?
It did, because for the first time, we have to understand there's a lot of kickback on Roundup and glyphosate, genetic modification. There's lots of, and it's a very complicated field. And I understand all of that. I understand both sides, and I like my organic partners in this food chain that we're involved with. But the reality is that the volume that we produce in commercial farming, without getting too much into the pros and cons of it, because I want people to think about what we've done with commercial agriculture. The volume that we're producing goes around the world. This is a product that is not just feeding livestock. It's making, you go in a grocery store, all the printing, there's corn oil in the printing. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of products made from corn, and it is abundant. And excuse me. So in 1995, chemicals came into play about the time I started farming. Herbicides, insecticides came in the 1970s. And prior to that, we had yields that were in that 100 bushel range, 120 bushel range. My grandfather had 40 bushel corn. And my dad had 100 bushel corn when I started farming. When I quit farming, we are 300 bushel per acre. The biggest problem with all of this production is the input costs. It takes nitrogen, phosphate, and potash to make those big yields, and it takes lots of selective breeding to get those seeds to produce that larger stalk, the larger leaf, the larger ear. Number 2 yellow corn is what's preferred in the commercial business, and people just really don't. In general, most people don't understand the volume that we're dealing with. There's 56 bushels of shelled corn or 56 pounds to a bushel. And, everybody knows how big a bushel basket is, and you get $4 or $5 for that. But you take that bushel and you get a semi load, you have 1,000 bushel, and you take 3 semis and you got a carload. and you got a railroad train that has 150 cars going west to the West Coast from central Midwest. Train after train after train, and we had the Mississippi River, shipload after shipload. It goes out down the Gulf. It's a worldwide commodity, and it's globalization is currently it's a big deal. So this image, this motif that I have of corn is my way of speaking to the public. It's big. Chaz Olenberg is one of my favorite artists, and you make it big to make people stop and look at what it really is. And so whether you like genetic modification or not, we are producing and feeding the world. Without those 16 billion bushels from here, life would be very different.
We'll return to Meilahn in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. Join AACG for their next First Friday Fired Up program on Friday, December 5th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, when AACG presents its annual awards. The program is free and open to the public with registration. This year, Penland School of Craft, which is receiving AACG's annual award, will give a presentation, as will the Bay Area Glass Institute, which is receiving AACG's Judith Liebman Community Organization Award. AACG honors awardees are Amy Schwartz and Bill Gudenrath, who designed, built, and lead the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass, and Rita and Larry Sybrack for their many years of dedication to and support of glass artists in the glass community. Visit the AACG website at aacgglass.org for more information and the registration link. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Wet Dog Glass. In business since 1996, Wet Dog Glass delivers unsurpassed value to glass studios like Corning Museum of Glass and others around the globe. Offerings include turnkey hot glass studio equipment, studio planning consultation, and technical support. Wet Dog Glass, your studio's best friend. For more information, visit wdg-us.com. And now, we return to Meilahn. So what went into developing and making the corn form?
That was quite a process. First of all, the small, production kind of things, it's pretty easy to make the small ones. But when I started making the largest one, and of course I tacked this, the first thing that I made in 1995 when I planted my first genetically modified seed, I should talk about this a little bit, is that I wanted to make something, and I wanted to make conceptual work. I just decided I wanted to make installations, and so I made these large black balls, so maybe 2 feet high, and I just glued on with silicone the regular size glass ear that we glue, and they look like mines. And and then I put them on bungee cords, and of course, bungee cords and glass really don't go together very well. And we broke a lot of pieces, but the whole idea of hanging a cluster of these together and then putting on bungee cords and bouncing them, swaying them, spinning them, it creates this tension when people are looking at them because they know they're going to break if you spin them hard enough. And doing that in a gallery was prohibitive, because flying glass would just not be a part of this. But it was the idea, right away that if those were swung together, that they're going to break. And that was the idea of what we were dealing with genetic modifications, the fact that we don't know where this is going to go at that time. And it's funny, when I had this show at the university here in Oshkosh, where I hung it the first time, it was the same week, I think they were demonstrating in California, about the Frankensteins of genetic modification. So time-wise, it was the right piece to make at the right time. And of course, then I decided to add one more element because we had these round things to photograph in the studio. I said, well, let's just start breaking some of these so that we can get that footage. So that footage of standing back and slamming them together and grabbing that sound and watching these two balls come together and smash became one short little 2-second clip in the video that we use, which is about 2 minutes, but they're all about a minute or a second to 2 seconds long images of corn growing in the field. And then you have this smash and it goes away. And then these things are bouncing over the screen, going outside of the perimeters of the screen. So the screen is telling a story of drama. And that was fun, making those pieces, because it was a stepping stone to the next layer of installations that I did.
Did you develop a form that you blew into that created the kernels of the corn, or how did you do that? How did you create the texture feeling of corn on the cob?
Well, all making molds is factories, for example, had mold makers in their factories forever. And those people were never really got to get the focus or got the credit for it, because it's a job making any kind of a mold. And in this particular case, making something that big with that many bumps, there's a lot of undercuts. I had to make the mold in 6 pieces. So basically I took a piece of 4-inch PVC pipe and wrapped chicken wire around it to make the base. And then I put a lot of clay, and I made the whole ear out of clay with my hand, making the kernels. And I made the kernels specifically so they weren't perfect. You'd have two small kernels tight next to one another. So it made it look very organic. And making those, and then of course, once I got the positive made in clay, it was a matter of casting that into plaster, and then from plaster to bronze. And that process was pretty complicated, getting the bronze pieces cast so they registered. When you squeeze the mold together, hinged it together, that they registered and you didn't see the marks of the mold. And I got some pictures of it, I think, in here somewhere. But yeah, once I had the mold, but then learning how to blow in the mold, that was another, month ordeal or more. And of course, getting them to anneal correctly was another hassle. The first 50 or so started breaking, a couple of months after the fact, because I didn't have the heated up enough before they went in the annealer. And of course, the big pieces like that, you need help. So we always work with 2 more people. My son is a big guy, and he has big hands. And so it was a perfect fit. I was able to make much bigger pieces than I could make by myself. But when we started making them really good ones, we learned, how to do it, because the ear is a little shorter and it's stubbier. So we got to pull it out to make it look, taper. And I learned after I made, 50, 60 more of them, I realized I had to put a hole in each one, a small enough hole that I could hang it. Because how do you deal with these things? And how do you ship them? Because in a box, we tried doing that. And in cardboard boxes, you have to have such a large box because the weight of those. And so when the installations came up for these big pieces, then it was all crating. So now you have another whole issue when you start, building crates. Then you have another issue when you start putting 16 of them in the same box. You have a box that weighs 1,000 pounds or more, and now you have this issue of forklifts and transporting these things. And it big work is a lot of work. It's what it boils down to. And then of course, when you start shipping these things, shippings today has gotten really expensive, and that's getting to be an issue. But when I made the first installation that I had in that was purchased, it was a group exhibition in Davenport, Iowa, and it was curated by Mark Fowler, and Dale was in it, and a lot of people were in that show. And at the end of the show, the piece was purchased, and it's called Corn Zone. And that was the first piece I made without the bronzes. I hadn't gotten to the bronze part of making objects. So There were 28 of those, and that was where that same little clip where they're breaking, is a part of the video. And crops growing in the field. There's some lightnings or some thunder. There's lots of audio to add to these things, and then when you start moving these pieces, they react, and the shadows is projected back onto the wall, adding another 8-foot black object swinging across the screen. But they purchased that work, and so then that was about the time that I added onto my shop, because I thought, well, I can make some more of these, because I got to think bigger for bigger institutions, and hence then I made the piece called Primordial Shift. And what I wanted to do with that particular, because by that time I was making bronze bases for a lot of these big ears of corn that are 38 inches long, and I needed to use a metal to support them, because they needed more oomph. And so I was making these large leaves, making stands, freestanding sculpture. But when Primordial Shift came around, that's when I started making the lateral leaves, because hanging just the verticals and the ropes were all part of the aesthetic of these pieces. I needed something to break them up horizontally, and that's when I came up with these. I called them spiders at the first time that I was drawing them out. They looked like spiders, but as I got to working with them, pretty soon the leaves got to be 4 inches wide, and some of them were spread as 5 feet, out 4 feet, 3 feet on each side. And I made them so they're very interchangeable. So the holes are in the same place on all of them, and then you can adjust them on the ropes at any height, or you can put multiple bronzes on top. And that was another whole style of work as well. So the bronze, by that time, I had 4 people working for me full time, and and we were farming a couple thousand acres. So I mean, my shop was designed so I could get my big machinery into the shop, and we'd be working on that in the spring at the same time. In the mornings, we'd maybe be blowing glass. I'd have people working on bronzes or working on machinery. And once spring came, everybody's back out to the field. So that's good and bad, leaving your work half done. But the real fun part is the excitement builds when I'm planting corn in the spring, because I know I'm going to be able to start finishing things up. And then after harvest, it's the same thing. Once harvest is over and the cold months set in, I can't wait to get back in the glass shop, because now I'm going to finish these pieces, or I'm going to leave them alone and do something else. But the excitement is really there when in that month of November, pretty soon December's over, and now it's time to really do some work. And so I had all these seasons. I think that I feel very fortunate to be able to have those things going on. Really rich experience.
Well, say more about Primordial Shift. It just got off of a big tour where it was exhibited in several different museums. Talk about where the installation was exhibited and how that all played out.
Well, originally, after I had made after that piece was purchased for the museum in Davenport, Iowa, then I wanted to make more installations, and there were some commissions that came along the way where I sold 4 to a restaurant. I sold 3 hanging with the bronzes to a particular bank, and there was different commissions here and there, but I wanted to make another piece where I could swing the pieces. That was the idea of swinging the pieces over the top of a video with audio is really intriguing, because the whole thing, because a lot of times they're in rows, 4-foot center, maybe 3 rows. So they look like they're set up like a cornfield is in rows, and they're in different heights. But when you get them all moving, those bronzes kind of act as, they almost look like birds moving around across the top of a field, because a lot of times it'll be a whole field of corn that you're going to be seeing. And then there was images of genetic modification in terms of symbols, flashing across the screen. And that's how Primordial came about. And it was part of an exhibition in Door County. And that particular museum, it's a 10-sided building. So I made 30 of these, and they were set up like bowling pins. And in the inside of the building, there were posts that held up the upper part of the mezzanine. And so these 12-foot squares were formed where it was basically a viewing spot, and there were 5 of those. And so I set up 5 pieces in each one of those, and then the projectors came out from the center. And that was where Primordial Shift was born. I think that was in I'm 14 maybe 2014. And since that time, it's gone to quite a number of museums, and it gets a lot of response. I mean, people have little kids love to run up and just grab their arms right around a hanging, shiny. They think it's a toy, and at the same time, you're talking about. I mean, there's that honest attraction to it, attraction to that listening, because the video is reflecting off of all around bumps, so it's kind of sparkles. But to people who are just disgusted because it's made out of corn, because they don't want anything to do with the genetic modification. And so you get this broad spectrum. And, Chaz Olenberg did this. A lot of people didn't understand his work, but his work was very, very simple. He just made big things just like they look. And you have to ask yourself, why is he doing this? Or what is this? And that's where I came across where the real validity of my work is that it makes people ask questions. And it's making people ask questions about contemporary art, about our contemporary time, where it's a discussion about our food chain. So, but it's taken a lifetime for me to really understand it for myself. And that's the response that I usually get from almost all the museums, is that a lot of people just love it because it has that richness that only glass can deliver. At the same time, it's telling a little bit of a story, and some people a story that they don't want to hear. So, and it's a lot of the collectors that I have are not necessarily glass collectors, and I think that's a real treat, a little bit of a thing that I kind of cherish, that it's not just glass. I know nothing wrong with glass collectors, don't get me wrong, but it's a little bit of a nice to know that it's crossing the line of being not just a glass collector.
Describe and discuss your work, Bonanza Blue Basket. When and why did you create that piece?
The reason that I did the basket is my connection to Native American in Bolivia, obviously. And they are the ones who crossbred the different varieties, Deosente and Zea maize, and made this corn. And number 2, yellow corn, is the one, like I said before, it is the biggest producer in the United States, around the world as far as that goes. So how do I congratulate, or how do I present them as being the forefront of the whole thing? Because they're the ones that over time, 10,000 years, as we understand history more, we know that nomadic roamers, hunter-gatherers were way, way deeper, longer ago than what the history books say. So when did they really start developing? They say 10,000 years, but I think probably it was long before that, because they were carrying their seeds with them, and they were constantly trying to make this better. So in today's time, how do I represent them? All I could think of is using their pattern on the basket, the stair-step sign, that has a lot to do with terraces, but the Native Americans, that symbol is on everything. It's on blankets, it's on their weapons, it's on it's everywhere. It's on their buildings, and it basically is 3 lines: 1 line up, 1 line over, and 1 line up. So those, everything above those is in the heavens. Everything below is the underworld. But that symbol is as sacred to them as the cross is to Christians. I mean, that symbol, that is Native Americans. It's on everything, and it's not just in this country, and it's around the world. So I had to use that pattern, because, and then the basket, you put everything came out of that basket, because everything, these large ears of corn representing where we are today in our big production, feeding the world with this volume that's grown in 2 countries. It's just throwing. It's congratulating them. It's thanking them. It's marking the indigenous people as starting this whole thing. And when I first put it out, I had about 8 or 10 arrowheads, made in glass, that were 4 or 5 inches long. But we quit doing that because they would always disappear. At the end of the show, they'd be gone. And we couldn't do that anymore. But then how do you, making titling work is also, or do you have a title before you make a work? This is always a walking, so how do I do this? And so when I made the basket, I was at it for, I think, 3 years, and I cut up a tree, and then a whole tree, I was experiment, because I kept breaking when I was bending them, I kept breaking the boards when I'm bending them on the frame. I made a stainless steel frame, and so that rust wouldn't build up when we were steaming, and that wouldn't rust the wood. And so then I give up on it, and then I let it go for 6 months or even longer, and I started again. So finally in 2019, I said, I'm going to finish this. So I spent 6 months working on it, and I had a carpenter come and help me and work out the wrinkles with the bending. And we really had fun making that piece. And it traveled with another exhibition called David Wagner had a show called Environmental 1, Environmental 2, which I was part of both of those, and 2 different pieces. And that piece went around the country too, and I got a lot of reviews. So, but it's the whole idea is saying, I'm trying to tell people where it's all coming from. And Bonanza blue corn, blue corn chips, a contemporary item we're eating today. That was mostly why I settled on the blue part.
So you also created some commissions during your career, is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us about some of those. Tell us about the highlights. I saw your piece. Is it pronounced Zia Mays?
Zia Mays, yeah.
Nuevo, that piece?
Yep.
Or that
Zia Mays Nuevo was Horicon Bank commissioned me to make a piece of work in, I guess, around that same time, 2000. I'm trying to think, it is 2009, 2010, maybe 2011. I can't remember. But and it hangs above it. When they were building the bank, they said, we want one of your pieces, or we work out a commission. Of course, that is always a long ordeal too, making people happy, what they think they want, and me thinking what I want. It's always a toss up how this works. But anyway, they settled on 3 pieces, very large bronzes going off laterally, and it was hung above. It's an add-on where you drive around the bank, where you can see it through the windows on the outside. So it has lots of windows, and there's 3 of them that hang over the conference table, and that was fun to do. And that bank does a lot of work with farmers, so it's a response to the recognizing the farmers in the art world. So I think that was pretty cool. And then another one I did was for a restaurant that was part of the current hotel in Davenport, Iowa. and it's not too far from the Figge Art Museum, and they saw the work, and we had four of them there, one on each pedestal along one wall in the restaurant. And that was a fun one too, because it was in a restaurant. So a lot of people get to see them. There's been quite a few. I've sold quite a few of these larger pieces, individual pieces with bronzes as base, big leaves holding them up, that kind of thing. And a number of those are sold too. So,
Those are so beautiful because the husks are created out of bronze and it holds the glass corn. Such a
right.
perfect combo of those materials. I love those pieces.
Yeah, well, it's the engine of a plant. There's the engine where everything comes from, the sun, and that leaf sucks it up. So it's the powerhouse. It's what's growing the plant. So that makes sense to me. A lot of times I'll have on a lot of pieces, especially in the installations, I'll have numbers on little different figures or little round balls pushed into the glass, because we can't see genetic modification. So I want people to register in their minds what you're looking at. You're looking at genetically modified corn. So what is this?
Yeah.
I want them to think about the volume. I want them to think about all the benefits and think about the bad sides. Roundup gets a lot of bad rap. And so do a lot of other products get a lot of bad raps. But we learn to make things better. So I won't get into an argument on any of this, but I just want people to really understand that this is a wonderful thing. The beauty of going from little tiny ears that are only 3 inches long over thousands of years to this 16 billion bushels annually grown just in this country alone is a phenomenal feat that humankind is able to produce. And then it does not come without problems because of globalization and all the hassles involved. So
You're saying in some
um,
ways, Roundup is, or things like it, are responsible for allowing that to happen, and people don't realize that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, getting back to my experience working with no chemicals, um, even the best of the organic people, from time to time when things get out of control, I mean, it's their last resort. They have to do something to, clean things up. And some of them do, and some of them won't touch anything. But it takes lots of labor to do organic farming. It's a tremendous amount of labor. And but this all comes to some kind of a conclusion, because where do we get our potash? We get it from out of state. I mean, all our potash, 95% of it comes from Canada, just like lumber. A lot of lumber comes from Canada. And the farmers have gotten so big and they're controlled by fewer and fewer companies that grow seed, or chemical companies. Now it's the oil industry that it's connected directly to the chemical companies. These big conglomerates are controlling the price of our inputs, and that is somewhat of a problem, because there's less and less competition. And to farmers and in the global world, China does not play by the rules of global use of traits. A lot of the Roundup that we use comes from China because it's cheaper. Same product, but it's cheaper. Farmers today can't afford to have our fertilizer prices to continue to go up, because they're going to go backwards, because of interest rate can't go up. And usually when you have a boost in prices over years, it's caused by something, weather, and then the rest of the market recovers. But we're still growing. For example, we're growing a lot more volume, but corn, beans, and wheat are trading at very same prices that they were 10 years ago. And in wheat in particular, you can go back 50 years ago, the same price. And it's not going to continue to work that way. That's why I'm talking about why this is a contemporary art piece, because we have to question how many more billions of people are we going to put on this planet.
Yeah.
And if we took away all of the benefits of genetic modification, we'd have one starving world really fast.
Well, back to your work, in addition to your ability to combine beautiful cast bronze stands and holders for your glass, you also developed some really interesting ways to display the corn on the wall, like your pieces where you do like a blown form that multiple ears of corn can hang from. Talk about that a little bit, about investigating different ways to display the corn.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real kind of a struggle accepting the fact that people don't like my work because it's corn. I mean,
I love it because it's corn.
yeah,
I love it.
a lot of people see the negatives, looking at only the negative sides of commercial farming, all of that, and I'm very sensitive to that, because it's the intellectuals that are driving these kinds of conversations, and they're negative. And but for me to sell a ear of corn to a farmer, he's not going to buy it because he doesn't understand the art aspect of it. And I love my farmers, don't get me wrong, but the glass collector or the artist or the art collector doesn't really want it either, because he doesn't think too much of, he doesn't want to be out of sync with the times, so to speak. And then there are some people that doesn't bother them at all. So getting back to your question, harmony, up with a name for that particular piece was really difficult. And I talked to my friend John Clark, and I was showing him the piece, and I said I'm having a hell of a time. And I rambled off all the titles, and he said, yeah, it's sort of like notes. And I thought, of course it is. It's notes. And then that from the note aspect, I went right into calling it harmony, because notes have harmony, and that gave me the ups and downs. Each note is specific, and from an aesthetic standpoint, it's specific, but it also has undertones of, well, there's an arrowhead in it or part of it, but they're all pieces. All the bronzes on there are shells that we took off the side in wax. We took off an actual ear. In other words, when we're making these bronzes, I use a water-soluble wax, and we dip them horizontally into a soft, warm wax until we build up a quarter inch. Then you put the casting wax out over the top, and what that does, we put it in water, and it dissolves, and it adjusts for a quarter inch of strength per foot when you cast the wax into bronze, so it would fit like a glove right on those. So I had a lot of those laying around. I thought, I want to just make a bracket and use those because they're so intriguing. All those little bumps, they look like alligator backs or parts of alligators' tails. And then I started adding glass to it, and really changing what a stalk looks like, for example, change to a big tube, decorative, and then making some distortions and adding other things to it. And then mounting these all on a wall with the idea that I'm making a song out of all these aesthetic objects. And when they're put in the right order and arranging them was a real job. And then putting them on the wall is a real job, because we have to stay pretty much on track. Otherwise it didn't look right. But that piece, it got some traction, but at the same time, it's maybe time to split it all up and sell it all individually. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's some of those in there that are really rich that I think would make single wall pieces too. But harmony in agriculture.
So, Mick, what is coming up for you in the rest of 2025 and into 26? I know you just got off a tour of museums with Primordial Shift.
What's coming up?
Does one of those runs through the end of September? Is that correct? One of those shows?
And we combined Primordial Shift and Bonanza Blue, and we've had 4 or 5 exhibitions with that. And David Wagner was my agent through this process, and he handles a lot of art shows his whole life. And we've been friends for quite some time. And I'm going to turn 80 in 3 months. That's new. So it's time to maybe just back off a little bit. But I really definitely want to keep promoting these two pieces, maybe traveling individually. I'm always open to other institutions if they want to show their work. It really needs to go, to the bigger museums that can handle the space. This last show, I didn't hang the pieces from the ceiling because they didn't have the structure good enough to get it the pattern that I laid out, and so I made these tripods. And the last time I showed Primordial Shift in Minnesota, where it's up now, they're all on three-legged tripods, and what that does is that it changes it dramatically because I can't swing them because the bronzes are inside of that diamond or that diamond shape, which has changed the movement of it. But I have all these V's going between the pieces. I've changed the geometrics of it dramatically. So I can go to smaller museums now that don't have the amines in the ceilings to hang these pieces and still set up primordial shifts. And it could be in any number. So that's what's nice about both of those pieces. They are very, very adjustable.
So, Primordial Shift is about the broad arc of change from early domestication of corn by indigenous peoples to genetic engineering induced by science in the 20th century, and the modification and commodification of plants and animals and implications for consumers. I know this is a big question, but what are your thoughts on those issues? Are those advancements?
We're always going to be technically we are always going to be advancing forward. My yeah, CRISPR, the latest thing, actually altering and changing the outcome of a gene is really adding things into it. I mean, this is a big deal. Where AI. I mean, I've been talking about AI already when I was making primordial shift in the beginning, because I said eventually we're all going to be taken out and computers are going to take over. And if to put that in perspective too, I mean, when I got my first pack phone, this was in the early 90s, I guess. I had a phone and I'm in a back 40, a mile away from home, and I don't have to meet my wife for a lunch or need fertilizer to come to this field. I have a phone. I mean, that changed everything for us as farmers. GPS has changed everything for farmers in the last 10 years. All the new stuff is all automated. Everything runs off satellites. And my fear is that if we have a glitch in satellites, we're all going to get our phones shut down. Tractors are going to come to a standstill, and so will the robots that are making cars, and everything else comes to a standstill if our satellites are taken out. We are at big risk. I don't know how that's ever going to be maintained. I mean, that's a scary thing to think about. But farming is locked into it big time. We all are.
Are there any positive impacts or implications of us being so dependent on all of this stuff?
Well, it's just like DoorDash now. It's a part of daily life, and can we get by without it? Maybe.
Yes. Yes,
And
Nick.
and if but our world, our energy needs with AI, the consumption of electricity and energy to produce and maintain AI I think it's much greater than we realize. And how are we going to maintain that and maintain everything else unless we come up with more friendly fuel systems? And the oil industry is locked on. And I could get into that whole thing with ethanol, but you know, for example, ethanol is the oil industry has the infrastructure to distribute alcohol but it's 10% of their total income, total usage. They don't like that. They don't like it at all. And that's why we don't have E15. Do we want to substitute farmers directly from taxpayers because their crops can't be sold? Or do we want to let them use E15 so they can sell and not have a surplus and get a good price for their corn? I mean, you have everything's tied together here in this global world that we live in. We can't have one and you can't have that. We're all in it together. And the technology is how we're all hooked into it. And we're very susceptible, I think, as a human race. We got a
And
lot of
what,
people to feed.
yeah, and what about AI's impact on art and art making?
It's a big one. If you can do a drawing and hand it to somebody and just knock it out like a cookie, is it art? I don't know. That goes back to what we question as artists. What is art? I mean, I'm not real sure. I've been making stuff all my life, and I just call it stuff because I have a habit of making stuff, and I can't help myself. So it is what it is. Did it make a lot of money? No. Some people made a lot of money making glass, but they went after that specific goal of money driven. And I think there's more to life than always chasing money. But that's the humanities, and that's the human side of us. We're all want to be warm and fuzzy. Well, we just can't be that way all the time. So, but I do hope to get. My wife says all the time, let's just book it someplace else. She's my strongest supporter, obviously, and I couldn't be doing all this if I didn't have this kind of support. And I've had a lot of support by being on a board at the Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass. They gave me the retrospective exhibition where I was allowed to present all this work in one building, which is huge because they have a lot of space and they gave me a lot of space to show the work. So, and being on a board is in the art world. To be on a board at an art museum, every artist should be on a board at one time to find out all the hassles that art museums have, because they run on air all the time, and they run on volunteers. They can't survive without their wonderful volunteers, and there's some politics involved in everything, like as there is in museums. But the goal of museums in general is to present art, and art of all kinds. And I think my work is, by the time I reach 80, where I am right now, I feel pretty good about the show that they put on for me, and specifically where I was able to present that much. And I look forward to kind of, taking what I have left to sell. I have quite a few pieces left to sell. And from time to time, out of the blue, I get somebody calls up, and promoting work in museums, promoting work on the street, or selling your work, two different animals. They attract different kinds of buyers. Art collectors are fortunate enough to have enough money to buy art. They like what they buy, and they like it for their reasons. And so, you can't hit everybody. You can't make everybody happy. I think Picasso was the best at that. He made a lot of really ugly work, but he also became very famous by making that kind of work. So ugly, I mean, it's not warm.
Yeah.
And art doesn't have to be warm and fuzzy all the time. So, and that's where I kind of stood on my own feet there by making this genetically modified object. And it is what it is. And I'm definitely going to be pushing more shows. So we'll keep you in touch. That's for sure. So
Thank you so much. That was all I had for you, Mick. Is there anything else you wanted to include or talk about on the podcast?
no, but to the collectors out there, there's they sustain a lot of people when they need help. they sustain a lot of museums, a lot of organizations. If we're thanking anybody, it should be the museum donors as well as the museum staff around the country. They all do their part and they work hard. So we're just living in a country where we have these museums. So hope we can keep having these museums where we can have these kind of interactions. I wish more public, could get more public involved in seeing art, but it is what it is. So hope we can survive this difficult times.
Thanks for tuning in to Talking Out Your Glass. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass, providing extraordinary glass experiences to spark fun, kindle creativity, and illuminate learning for all. Your financial support during these holiday seasons. Provide creative activities for all ages, community-wide events, artful discoveries, and a continued legacy of free admission. Visit bmmglass.com/donate. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Covington Engineering. Finish your fused glass with Covington's professional line of cold working tools, now located in Meridian, Idaho. Visit covington-engineering.com for your cold working needs. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. Join AACG for their next First Friday Fired Up program on Friday, December 5th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, when AACG presents its annual awards. The program is free and open to the public with registration. This year, Penland School of Craft, which is receiving AACG's annual award, will give a presentation, as will the Bay Area Glass Institute, which is receiving AACG's Judith Liebman Community Organization Award. AACG honors awardees are Amy Schwartz and Bill Gudenrath, who designed, built, and lead the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass, and Rita and Larry Sybrack for their many years of dedication to and support of glass artists in the glass community. Visit the AACG website at aacgglass.org for more information and the registration link. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Wet Dog Glass. In business since 1996, Wet Dog Glass delivers unsurpassed value to glass studios like Corning Museum of Glass and others around the globe. Offerings include turnkey hot glass studio equipment, studio planning consultation, and technical support. Wet Dog Glass, your studio's best friend. For more information, visit wdg-us.com. To find out more about Talking Out Your Glass, visit talkingoutyourglass.com, where you'll find all 10 seasons of the podcast, artist images, and more. Please consider becoming a Patreon co-producer of the podcast by visiting patreon.com/talkingoutyourglass, or to make a one-time donation, visit the website and click on Donate. Until next time, stay glassy.